Hey everybody, Reaper here again with another video. This is going to be a spotlight video where I highlight one book and I talk a little bit about it. And I think there's a lot of buzz about this particular book right now. I mean, as of right now, we're at the end of 2020. So you could be watching this video in 2021. There could be no buzz about it by then or whatever. So you got to keep in mind the timing of this video, but I still like to talk about these things. I think they're still valuable in some form or another. But anyway, I wanted to highlight a little bit on Giant Size X-Men #1. I think over the last year or so, maybe a little less than a year, a little over a year, whatever it is, there's been more of a spotlight on this particular book. And I think, as of right now, this could turn out to be completely false, so forgive me if you're watching this after the fact. But I think there's a bit of speculation on this. But first off, before we get to the speculation, the book is a good book to have no matter what, I think. It is the introduction of the new X-Men. Yes, I've heard the argument that Foom 10 is the true first appearance of Colossus right here, and Storm, Nightcrawler, Thunderbird, all that. I've heard, because they remember Foom was the magazine Marvel put out in the 70s where they would talk about their comics, and you would see previews of upcoming comics, and one of the previews was Giant Size X-Men #1, the new X-Men that were going to be introduced in this book, to get people ecstatic about, wow, we're going to see this a new X-Men story, the first new X-Men story in their own book for the first time in 5 years, without seeing, because over the years the X-Men appeared in different Marvel books. I know Incredible Hulk, Beast showed up a couple of times, Cyclops showed up, Beast I think was active in the Avengers, and other things. These characters showed up every now and then, but finally, after 5 years of reprints, we're finally going to see the X-Men again, and we're going to have some new X-Men involved. So that's what Foom did, and then eventually this book came out. So I think that this book, ever since it came out, had some sort of buzz about it, because it represented, the beginning of these new X-Men, which would later go into the series starting up again with issue 94, with all these X-Men now part of the team and trying to get along and then going on their next mission. And Chris Claremont did a really good job, I think, for many years, but especially in those early few years where the X-Men, went on this one continuous story arc. And it reminds me a lot about some of those story arcs in The Walking Dead, minus the zombies, where the X-Men would get involved in some sort of scenario. Going back to Banshee's ancestral home and running into the Juggernaut and Black Tom Cassidy, or running into the Starjammers, the Dark Phoenix saga, these long multi-issue story arcs, much like The Walking Dead, where you had these long story arcs with the Saviors and the Whisperers and all these other storylines with the farm and the governor and all these different things. And I think it made for very entertaining reading. And it helped solidify the X-Men. And a lot of it, if not all of it, can be traced back to this book. So, like I was saying earlier, the book is a very good book to own no matter what. Now we get to what I was talking about, the spotlight, the buzz on it. I think there are a lot of people specking on this book that, since the Marvel Cinematic Universe has acquired the rights to the X-Men, has acquired the rights to the Fantastic Four and all these other characters that were related, Deadpool, related to those series that were owned by Fox. I think there's now a lot of interest in what the MCU is going to do with these characters, how they're going to be introduced, whether they're going to introduce them again with the origins of Professor X and Iceman and Cyclops and all of that, or are they going to do something where they focus heavily on what started here in Giant Size X-Men 1. So with the fact that this being a good book regardless, and the speculation, I think there's been more of a spotlight on this book than there has been in a while. It was always a kind of a pricey book, and it had its, price spurts, if you will. But I think within the last year, as of, late October 2020, there's been some heightened interest in this book. Now, as you can tell, I have a 6.5, so it's not really a very, very high grade. It's not a low grade, but it's not necessarily a high grade book like those 8.0s, 9.0s, and all that. And when I first picked this up, this was the, believe this was the very second slab I ever purchased when I came back to the hobby. When I came back to the hobby, I bought a couple of Raw books because that was what I was familiar with. But as I was shopping in some of these comic stores, I looked up at the wall and I'm looking at things that were encased in this, in the CGC and CBCS. I'm like, oh my God, I thought of that years ago, that comic book should have been put in some sort of plastic shell. Back when I was collecting in 93, 94, I remember saying, wouldn't it be cool if comic books were able to be encased in some sort of tomb where you could just look at them and protect them from water damage, from other sorts of accidents that might happen. And it's one of those things I thought about and then forgot about. And then when I went back to the hobby, I saw it. So that was pretty cool. I've also noticed that sometimes these books that are encased go for a little bit more. Not all the time, but I've noticed that they tend to fetch a little bit more because maybe the grade is right there in front of you. Oh, I think this is a 6. Oh, I think it's a 7. Well, no, it's a 6.5. That's what CGC says, despite what you think. And that's what it's going to be sold as. So I think because of that, people may feel a little more secure with having them encased, other than the other things I mentioned, like safety things, like water damage and all these other things. So this was the very second slab I had purchased. Actually, I had the slab replaced because the original one, which was, it wasn't the original CGC label, the old label as it's called. It was the middle label. But it had, where it snaps over here, one of those things was broken, and you could hear it rattling in here. So I said, let me get this thing re-slabbed, and I did 2 years ago. And I like the new slabs. They're sturdy, darker print when it comes to the number, all that stuff. But yeah, this was the very second slab I ever purchased. And Giant Size X-Men, I originally had a copy from 1994, and I sold it off to help buy this. And then when I bought this, it wasn't that expensive because I bought it in 2014. I probably should have sprung for an 8.0, wouldn't have been that much more, but I didn't. But, for those of you that were able to pick up higher grades of this book, or are thinking about getting higher grades of this book, who knows? It might be worth it because of that spotlight, all that talk that was going on. I would imagine, or I'd like to think, as I said in a previous video that I made, I don't know when I made it, a year ago, a little less than a year ago, that what I would like to see when the X-Men show up in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, I would like to see them start from the Giant Size 1, or at least a version of that. You don't have to have them fighting, Krakoa or anything like that. But I think it'd be far more interesting to see older X-Men trying to recruit new X-Men to solve a problem. And that's how you would introduce some of them. Do you have to use all the same characters? No. I mean, I couldn't care less about Thunderbird or Banshee or Sunfire. Although Sunfire, I think he sometimes gets a little too much shit. I mean, he's not that bad, as a matter of fact. I think I like Sunfire. But anyway, it would be nice to see them start off from there and see some of those great Claremont stories come to life in the MCU in some sort of long X-Men story arc, as the MCU has been proven to do so well with the Avengers and Thanos and some other characters. So that's my spotlight. And those are some of the reasons why I think there's a spotlight on this book right now. Again, I said it again. I said it before, and I'll say it again. Things might change. But I don't think they're going to change so much where Giant Size X-Men, people are like, I can't believe that book was hot. No, no matter what, it's still a great book to have. for its history in the comic book industry, especially for Marvel, because it was really the launch pad for the X-Men, and the X-Men turned out to be Marvel's best-selling title in the 1980s. It went from one of the worst selling titles in the 1960s to being Marvel's bread and butter in the 1980s, all the way up to the 90s, and they're still very popular today. Thank you for watching. Take care.